Speakers tonight is sitting there at the far left of the table, so to speak. And it's Natassa. Sorry, Natassa. It's Natassa Romanou, who's with us from New York City. She's a founding member of Syriza-NY. She was in Greece during the elections and is a Greek immigrant to the U.S. She's spoken frequently about the situation in Greece, including earlier this year. Actually, came up to Canada to visit Montreal, I believe, as well. Her day job is, of course, research professor at Columbia University in climate studies and other such things. Yes, also affiliated with NASA's climate research program. Definitely no lightweight on any front. And she'll tell us about, bring us up to date on the most recent trajectory within Greece, the elections, the aftermath, and the lessons that already are sort of.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for the previous two speakers who gave such a great outlined so nicely the situation right now in Europe, but also in Greece, the humanitarian crisis in Greece. I would like to go over some of the things that, the most important things that I want you to remember about the situation in Greece right now. Since 2010, Greece has been put under the supervision of the Troika. Troika is the three-party organization that the European Council, the European Central Bank, and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, who each are overseeing the restructuring of the Greek economy for the reason that it couldn't sustain, the Greek government couldn't sustain the public debt that it had accumulated the years prior to 2010. The debt in 2010 was at 130% of the GDP. It's a big number, but it's not a huge number if you look at different countries around the world and the debt that they had. So meanwhile, after 2010, Greece received one of the largest bailout packages any country has received. It was about 230 billion euros over 5 years. That was two and a half times the actual economy, the bailout package. So it's very hard to understand how such a big bailout package didn't eventually pay off that debt. So meanwhile, though, Troika obviously gave this bailout package to Greece, but required something in return, and that was to sign two memoranda of reforms, one in 2010 and the other in 2012, that essentially created the basis of the austerity program, the austerity measures in Greece. And that austerity program that was described earlier as well led to a recession of the Greek economy. Actually, the Greek economy contracted by about 25%, which is the fastest and the largest amount an economy contracted over peacetime anywhere in the world any time in history. The incomes and the wages were reduced by about a third, and that happened mostly in urban families, which in urban families with kids. Okay, is that better? And And that created a huge problem because this is one of the most vulnerable part of the population because they have dependents and they don't have any other means to withstand the pressure, the economic pressures. They cannot cultivate the land because they live in urban areas. They cannot find any other means of earning income. So the unemployment, as we heard before, skyrocketed to 25% overall, and 1 out of 2 young people is right now unemployed. But not only that, there were the people who were employed were actually found themselves in very precarious conditions with flexible employment schemes and part-time jobs and so forth. So while this was all happening, in the pretext that we wanted to pay off the debt, the unsustainable debt that Greece had accumulated, labor laws that were created, that were won over with years of struggles in Greece, were abolished almost overnight. Collective agreements were restricted, employment legislation changed, overtime premiums were cut, working hours were implicitly increased, and so forth. And there was horizontal taxation that was placed across the system in order to create the surpluses that would pay off eventually the debt. And the cost of living at the same time remained very much the same. Public property, privatizations of public property started with fast-track procedures, no public endorsement, of course, or support. Ports, parks, utilities, the water companies, for example, were privatized almost overnight. And at the same time, all ecological and environmental concerns were put aside. Private companies came into the country, took over natural forests for extraction. One of such companies is a Canadian company, El Dorado, which created one of the largest ecological destructions right now in Greece over the last decades. The worst destruction over the last decades. And at the same time, there was an announcement that Greece would be looking for oil in the maritime areas of the country, like, for example, the northern Aegean and the Ionian Sea, and which of course is going to compound the climate change and the global warming problems that the world has. And who is going to do all these extractions? Of course, not the Greek state, because it can't afford to do so. So it will invite foreign companies to do that. So these measures plunged Greece into an unprecedented recession, as we saw, and it was an assault on the middle class and the lower income classes. The humanitarian crisis that resulted was enormous. And we have examples that were discussed before. Extreme poverty, 10% of adults have crossed the line of extreme poverty. 16% of kids in Greece right now are in extreme poverty. Homelessness increased by 25%. We have suicides, we have hospitals running short on medicine, and so on and so forth. That was the humanitarian crisis. At the same time, we have the refugee issue, which I thank you very much for bringing it up, because nobody else in the world is discussing this issue. That's an issue not only of Greece, but all the southern European countries, who are witnessing every day hundreds of people drowning in their water borders because the refugees are trying to escape the political and economic conditions in their countries and trying to find refuge in Europe. And what they, of course, find is very difficult conditions to land. And after landing, they are forced with persecution and with indictments and deportation, of course. So, and at the same time, another big problem in Greece, of course, during these years of austerity, we have the rise of the extreme right, fascist party of Golden Dawn. It we knew that there were small groups of extreme right fascists in presence there forever. I mean, since Second World War, for sure. But during austerity and during the last 5 years, the rise has been tremendous. They are now 12% of the electorate. They actually have their own political formation, and they have seats in the parliament. And they are one of the worst ultra-nationalist fascist parties that exist right now in Europe, if not the worst. At the same time, that party and their crimes against the immigrants and against the left were going were not unpunished, exactly because the state was obviously promoting the existence of this party in order to keep control of the left. The police brutality towards left activists was enormous, but there was no prosecution for these people. And in that background, and the background of the fear that was actually enforced on the Greek people, that you cannot support the left because the left will take you out of the European Union, because the left will will nationalize your belongings and so forth, you can't support the left. Nevertheless, Syriza, in January of 2015, managed to be elected first party in the parliament with 32% of the votes. Syriza was 4% of the votes before the austerity. So we see that in that background of fear, of ultranationalism, you see nevertheless that the left got stronger and gained ground. But obviously, it didn't gain this ground because it radicalized people to the point of becoming leftists. It actually gained ground because it had a strong position, anti-austerity position. So the people who voted, the 32% of the people who voted for Syriza, they might not be on the left, they might not be even progressives, but they are definitely, they understand definitely austerity, and they know that they wanted to get out of this situation. Now, when Syriza got into power, the debt was 175% of the GDP, which means that it had actually increased, despite all the measures that were implemented by Troika, its allies, its local allies in the political system in Greece. The debt had increased because the debt was never, as Ingo said, the debt was never the real reason that austerity was implemented. The debt was a pretext that it was used for the elite, for the financial and the political elite in Europe to impose structural reforms, very much the same way that happened in Latin America, to change the labor laws, to create cheap labor, to become more competitive in the market against the BRICS and against the United States. So there was a misleading narrative, therefore, that we are doing all this because we want to save Greece, we are giving Greece all this money, but actually, if you look at the numbers, only 11% of the money, the bailout packages that were provided to Greece, were going to pay off, to sustain the Greek state, to pay off salaries and so forth. The rest was going in to actually service the debt, is going back into the hands of the creditors, and it was going, and 16% was going into interest rates alone. So we are seeing that there was a narrative, the victimization that you spoke about before, Peter. It was excellent and it worked. The people, so you blame the victims for the economic situation. You blame the victims for the debt, and so that you can convince them to accept the terms of the austerity, because they feel guilty that this situation, they created the situation which they are actually not responsible for. And that is a recipe that has been used everywhere in history whenever we want to contain people, whenever we want to contain movements, popular movements. The important thing, of course, is that that construct that we were talking about as debt, where did it come from and who owns this debt in the end? Where initially that debt belonged to financial institutions, was debt that, as Ingo described, came to Greece. Greece bought this debt, got all this financial support from different financial institutions, like, for example, banks or other types of creditors like that. And back in 2008, after the global economic crisis, this debt became unsustainable for Greece to pay. The private creditors were concerned that they might not get their money back. So what they did is that they gave it to the governments. And the European governments, instead of restructuring the Greek debt back in 2010-11, when it would be actually workable, this problem was workable, they decided to bail out the banks. Instead to bail out the people, instead to bail out the country, they bailed out the banks. And now the debt is owned by the European taxpayers. And they are turning working class people in Germany and in Netherlands and in Finland against working people in Greece. That is a master plan. That is a master plan of subjugating the populations and convincing people to accept their measures. That was the private sector involvement, or otherwise known, the bank bailout in 2011. So how we can stop austerity? Right now, Syriza is in power. And Syriza has one and main short-term goal to address the humanitarian crisis. The first month of negotiations after Syriza was in power made some suggestions to the rest of the European Union how to address the humanitarian crisis, how to save some money from the bailout packages, from the payments that they were supposed to make, in order to save money to fund the humanitarian crisis effort. The thing that Syriza was asking was to save 16% that goes to interest payments, to take this 16% and fund and help alleviate the humanitarian crisis, and that was not even accepted. So I don't understand what kind of European solidarity this is. If you prefer to make payments to the banks or to financial institutions when you have people dying and people going homeless, and not even giving up interest rates for this, for the payments. Syriza has a very big struggle to face. And the struggle and the big dilemma is the following. On the one hand, Syriza has to service and is committed to servicing the interest of the people that elected him. But on the other hand, it cannot lose the social majority that has given rise to it. And the social majority, the 32% of the people, which now has increased, seeing the effort that Syriza is putting into this struggle, this social majority is still hesitant in leaving the European Union, in leaving Euro. And the question is, what should Syriza do right now? Leave the European Union and lose the support that it has from the majority of the Greek people, or stay within the European Union and fight a struggle against the regime, waiting meanwhile for the Podemos in Spain to rise and for other working class alliances throughout Europe to emerge. And this is a big dilemma, and for the moment Syriza has chosen to stay within the European Union, within Euro, and within the monetary union, and at the same time put forward help build the alliances with the people of the South in Europe. That is not, of course, very easy, and that's where that's of course where our responsibility comes into play. The mobilizations of the base of the people, and we have because truly the alternative that we have is for us to take control. Syriza is expressing, is an expression of the government, is an expression of the will of the people in the government. So unless the people themselves recognize and form these coalitions that will help Syriza make the radical steps forward and away from this crisis, Syriza cannot do it by itself. So we are supporting the new, so it's very important for Syriza to support the new organizations of struggle within the base, within the society. Rank and file committees in the workplaces and every other aspect of everyday life, private life and working life. We need workers, youth and students together, the unemployed, the elderly to enter this common struggle. And these formations have been developing in the neighborhood assemblies in Greece, in the solidarity networks across the world, but also within Greece with the solidarity hospitals and the solidarity food networks. So these need to be empowered, these need to be continued with the support, obviously, from comrades across the world, because this is the only way that the Syriza government can remain true to its commitment to the people and can help push for the changes that we need while the rest of the left is organizing in other countries of the South. This is the only way, unless we build a hegemonic movement within the base right now in Greece, but also in Europe, we will not be able to push back into the policies that the European Union is imposing. It is true that European Union, as it is right now, cannot exist. But some kind of coalition of neighboring countries in Europe with common interests and common social struggles has to has to emerge from this crisis. And whether we are going to call it European Union or something else, I don't know. But this is the only way to get ourselves out of the crisis and into this new era of social struggles, of socialism. Yes.
Thank you, Natassa. So that brings us to the end of the speakers. I see hands up.